In 1940, a teenage boy in southern France was exploring a field when his dog fell into a hole.
Oh,
He climbed in after it. What he found at the bottom changed everything we thought we knew about human intelligence. The walls were covered in paintings, hundreds of them. Horses, bison, lions, rhinoceroses, painted with such anatomical precision, such understanding of shadow and movement, that when Picasso saw photographs of them, he reportedly said, "We have invented nothing." The paintings were 17,000 years old. But here is what nobody talks about. They were painted deep inside a cave, so deep that no natural light reached them. The artists had to carry fire with them just to see. They crawled through narrow passages. They positioned themselves at impossible angles to reach the walls. Nobody made them do this. There was no instruction, no priest commanding art, no economic benefit. The current leading theory among archaeologists is simpler and stranger than any of those. They had time, and they had no idea what to do with it. This is not the story you were told about ancient humans. The story you were told is that they were running, always running, hunting, foraging, surviving, every waking hour consumed by the urgent work of staying alive. That story is wrong. In 1966, anthropologist Marshall Sahlins published a paper that the academic world spent the next decade arguing about. He had studied the Juwanzi people of the Kalahari Desert, one of the few remaining populations living in a way that resembles the original human lifestyle. His finding was that they worked by direct observation between 15 and 20 hours per week on food acquisition, not per day, per week. Sahlins called them the original affluent society, not because they had wealth, because they had something that most people reading this almost never have: extended, unstructured, purposeless time. Now here is where the serious debate begins. Later researchers pushed back on Sahlins. When you count all activities, including tool maintenance, child care, food preparation, camp management, the number goes up significantly. The Juwanzi are not working 15 hours a week when everything is counted. But here is what nobody disputes. Even accounting for everything, ancient hunter-gatherers had dramatically more unstructured downtime than modern humans. And that gap is where everything interesting happened. Here's a question that sounds simple, but keeps archaeologists up at night. What is the oldest thing a human being ever made for no practical reason? Not a tool, not a weapon, not shelter. Something that served no survival function whatsoever. The current answer, based on available evidence, is a collection of shells found at Blombos Cave in South Africa. They were excavated in 2004, carbon dated to 75,000 years ago. Each shell had a hole drilled precisely through it. Each was coated in red ochre. The holes were positioned identically across all shells, suggesting they were strung together. 75,000-year-old jewelry. Consider what that requires. First, the person had to decide that making something beautiful was worth their time. They had a concept of beauty, of decoration, of how they appeared to others. Then they had to sustain attention on a task with no immediate reward for hours, possibly days. Drilling through shell with stone tools is extraordinarily slow work. If you try to rush, the shell cracks. Then they had to care enough for the finished object to keep it. The archaeologists who excavated these beads noted something that rarely gets mentioned in the popular accounts. Multiple shell beads show heavy wear patterns consistent with long-term use. Someone wore this jewelry regularly for years. 75,000 years ago, a human being cared about how they looked, and they had enough free time to do something about it. Now, here is the section that changes the rest of the story. The beads and the music and the cave paintings get all the attention, but the most consequential thing that happened during all those empty hours was something far more ordinary. People talked. Not about hunting, not about food, not about threats, about each other. Robin Dunbar is the anthropologist who discovered that human groups naturally stabilize at around 150 people, now called Dunbar's number. But his more interesting finding came from studying what humans actually talk about when conversation has no practical purpose. 65% of human conversation is social information. Who did what? Who is trustworthy? What happened to someone who broke the rules? Who is sleeping with whom? Who saved someone on the hunt last week? Dunbar calls this social gossip. Most people, when they hear that word, assume it is a flaw, something we do despite our better nature. Dunbar's argument is the opposite. Gossip, he argues, is the technology that built civilization. Before language, primates bonded through physical grooming. Grooming is effective. It releases oxytocin. It builds genuine trust, but it's slow and it cannot scale. You can only groom one individual at a time. If you need to maintain strong bonds with 50 members of your group, you simply don't have enough hours in the day. Language solved this problem. Language allowed humans to bond with multiple individuals simultaneously, to build trust with people they had never physically touched, to warn the group about someone untrustworthy without requiring direct confrontation. And, crucially, language allowed humans to discuss absent parties. This seems trivial. It is not. The ability to talk about someone who is not present is, in cognitive terms, extraordinary. It requires the ability to hold a mental model of another person, to simulate their thoughts, their likely actions, their history, their intentions. That is theory of mind, one of the most sophisticated cognitive operations any animal performs. And humans developed it sitting around fires with nothing to do, talking about each other. Here is where we have to stop and face the most uncomfortable version of this argument. The claim is not simply that boredom led to beads and flutes and campfire gossip. The claim, when you follow the logic to its end, is far more radical. Without boredom, there is no art. Without art, there is no symbolic thinking. Without symbolic thinking, there is no language beyond immediate practical communication. Without language, there is no social bonding at scale. Without large-scale cooperation, there is no agriculture, no cities, no accumulated knowledge, no science. Boredom is not a side effect of human consciousness. Boredom may be the engine of it. And the evidence is not in the grand monuments or the famous discoveries. The evidence is in the shells.
75,000 years ago, in a cave on the southern coast of Africa, someone with nowhere to be and nothing urgent to do picked up a small piece of stone and started drilling through a shell. They were not trying to change history. They were trying to get through the afternoon. In 2019, researchers at the Max Planck Institute analyzed the inner structure of that Swabian Jura flute, the 40,000-year-old vulture bone instrument. They found something unexpected. The instrument was not primitive. It was not the result of random experimentation. The finger holes were positioned with mathematical precision that would produce a specific pentatonic scale. The pentatonic scale, 5 notes, is the most universal musical pattern in human history. It appears in cultures separated by thousands of years and thousands of miles of ocean. Chinese classical music, West African drumming, Celtic folk songs, Native American ceremonial music, the riffs of blues guitar, all of them organized around the same 5 intervals. Researchers believe this is not coincidence. The pentatonic scale may be encoded in the human auditory system, built into how we hear, so deeply embedded it keeps being discovered independently across every culture. The person who made that flute 40,000 years ago was not experimenting randomly. They were following something inside themselves, something that was there before they had words for it, something that only became audible when the world went quiet enough to hear it. There is a detail from the Lascaux cave paintings that almost never makes it into the popular accounts.
When researchers analyzed the placement of the most extraordinary paintings, the ones with the most anatomical detail, the most dynamic composition, the clearest evidence of deliberate artistic intent, they found something strange. Those paintings were located furthest from the cave entrance. To reach them, the artists had to move through darkness for extended periods, carrying lamps that produced just enough light to see a few feet ahead, breathing air that became thinner as they went deeper, crawling in some sections, navigating passages so narrow that larger individuals may not have been able to enter. They did not paint at the front of the cave, where it was easy. They went deeper. This means the creation of those paintings was not casual. It was not someone picking up a piece of ochre and doodling on the nearest wall. It was a journey. And at the end of the journey, in near total darkness, thousands of years before any organized religion we have a name for, someone made something extraordinary. Not because they were commanded to, not because they were paid, not because they were trying to impress anyone who would ever see it, because something in them needed to exist outside of them. Because the silence of a cave with nothing to do and nowhere to be is where the things that need to exist eventually make themselves known. Here is the final question. We have built the most comprehensively entertainment-saturated civilization in human history. Every gap filled, every silence interrupted, every moment of potential boredom met with an algorithm designed by some of the most intelligent people on Earth, whose entire professional purpose is to make sure you never have to sit with nothing for more than 3 seconds. And we are, by almost every measured psychological metric, less creative, less contemplative, and more cognitively overloaded than at any point in recorded history. This is not a coincidence. The default mode network, the network responsible for imagination, empathy, and creativity, requires silence to activate. Not meditation, not sleep, not any special technique, just nothing. The ordinary, uncomfortable, difficult nothing that every person in a cave experienced every single afternoon. The nothing that produced the beads and the flute and the paintings and the stories and the questions about death and the questions about stars and the slow accumulation of wondering that eventually became science. You still have that network. It is still in there. It is not atrophied. It is not evolved away. It is as active and capable as it was in the person who drilled that shell in the dim light of a South African afternoon 75,000 years ago. It is just waiting for something you almost never give it anymore. The boy who climbed into that hole in 1940 to rescue his dog was 17 years old. His name was Marcel Ravida. He spent 3 days exploring those caves with his friends before telling any adults. 3 days of discovering something that no living person had seen in 17,000 years. He later said he remembered feeling in those first moments not triumph, not excitement, something quieter. The same feeling, he said, that he sometimes got when he was alone in a field with nothing to do, and his mind started to wander somewhere he hadn't been before. He couldn't explain it. He just knew it felt familiar.